All right, let's get started. Good morning, everyone. So, as you can see, we're gonna learn painting chapter today for the media and processes. Let's get started. So, painting is the practice of applying paint, pigment, color, or other medium to a solid surface. And the medium is commonly applied to the base with a brush, but other implements, such as knives, sponges, and airbrushes can be used. The final work is also called a painting. Painting is an important form in the visual arts, bringing in elements um, such as drawing, gesture, composition, narration, or abstraction. Paintings can be naturalistic and representational, photographic, abstract, narrative, symbolic, emotive, or political in nature. In art, the term painting describes both the act and the result of the action. The support for paintings includes such surfaces as walls, paper, canvas, wood, glass, lacquer, pottery, leaf, copper, and concrete. And the painting may incorporate multiple other materials, including sand, clay, paper, plaster, gold leaf, as well as objects. So there are many types of paintings, but we are going to see four main painting mediums today. The first one is fresco, and the second one is tempera, and the third one is oil, and the last one is acrylic. So let's see one by one. So let's see the fresco painting first. Fresco is above all a wall painting technique, and it has been used for large scale murals since ancient times. With the fresco, pigments are mixed with water and applied to a plaster support, usually a wall or a ceiling coated in plaster. The true fresco is paint made simply of pigment and water applied to wet lime plaster. As the plaster dries, the lime undergoes a chemical transformation and acts as a binder, fusing the pigment with the plaster surface. So let's see how it works through the video.
This copy of a 4th century fresco by Benozzo Gozzoli want to be a sort of stratigraphic of a fresco to grasp the materials and the executive technique. Fresco technique is based on the chemistry of the minerals elements, in particular lime, which develops adhesive forces only on materials of the same nature, minerals in fact. The terracotta brick wall is properly brushed and washed in order to receive a first layer of very rough mortar made up of 1 part of lime and 3 of coarse sand, or other inert particles of large granulometry. This layer is well beaten with a float and left very rough because it must ensure the grip of the next layers to the masonry, and therefore the stability of the entire work. On this first coarse layer called rough cast, we spread another one, arriccio, sand finished, still rough, repeating the same previous operation. It will be on this layer that the painter will sketch his preparatory drawing, the synopia. Until the middle of 15th centuries, Italian fresco painters frequently paint the outlines for the main forms in their composition on arriccio, the sand finish, before applying the new intonaco section. Most pigments employed for these compositional guides had a red earthy color called Sinopia. Sinopia was the name after the city it came from. Eventually, it became the name of this kind of underdrawing. Until the Renaissance, preliminary design were merely sketched on the wall. Later, a new method became common. Design were traced by pouncing.
So, he's tracing a sketch from the wall, and then he's gonna use this sketch later when he color on the wall.
The great attention to the selection of the ingredients, lime, sand, pigments. The preparation of the mortar occurred in the previous days, and the ability to spread the plaster were and are decisive elements such as painting itself. After having wet the wall to saturation, this last layer of mortar is laid on and painted before it is hardened, guaranteeing the properties of brightness and resistance typical of fresco. In
So he's applying the lime plaster on the wall for the painting.
particular, be careful not to leave air bubbles and maintain a constant flatness during work using wooden slats or wood float. Actually, since the end of 14th century, this last layer, composed of lime and sand, called intonaco, begins to be saturated with a further thin layer of mortar composed of lime and marble powder in equal proportion, called intonachino or velo. These guarantee greater smoothness and brightness of the bottom, thanks to the properties of calcium carbonate. At this point, according with the Giotto's technique, described in details by each, when remove the paper from the wall, you just connect the dots with
I'm sorry.
the most widely used method.
So, he just, put the lime plaster on some parts of the wall because he has to finish the painting before the plaster dries. So that's why he just, put the plaster some parts on the wall. And then when he finished this part, then he's gonna put another plaster on the, left or right side to continue the painting.
For tracing the design was the spolvero technique.
So do you remember this sketch? He made the, holes following of the, the sketch lines.
Pouncing, obtained by passing a colored powder pad through the holes previously created on paper. When remove the paper from the wall, you just connect the dots with a sharp brush and start painting. Subsequently, and throughout the Baroque period, this more precise but more laborious method was flanked and then replaced with indirect incision. The main lines of the drawing were pressed with the handle of the brush against the plaster through the paper, leaving the grooves rounded on the fresh mortar. The horizontal and vertical lines were instead incised directly with the handle of the brush on the fresh mortar, leaving in this case sharp edges.
So he just started painting.
Before the
And
total hardening of the mortar, the painter must know the
it
portion of the
will
plaster that will be able to complete daily,
look like
thus
this.
subdividing the work into working days. Giornata.
All right, and he's gonna continue to painting on the next part of the wall. So that's fresco painting. So as you can see, the process is very complicated and it takes so long to finish one piece of work. But once the painting placed in a wall, it lasts almost forever. So that's why we can see 500 or 600 years old fresco paintings today. And they are almost the same as the original. So looks familiar with this painting, everyone, right? So this is one of the Renaissance master Raphael's painting, the School of Athens. And it is a fresco large wall painting in Vatican. Um, so let's see the creation year. It's 1510 to 11. So since it is a fresco painting, we can still see the 500 years old painting today. In this fresco painting, nearly every great Greek philosopher is presented, um, including the two main subject, Plato and his student Aristotle, located at the fresco's central vanishing point with the 1 point linear perspective um, to represent the implied space on the two-dimensional surface. Now let's move on to the next painting technique, the traditional painting technique, tempera. Tempera is an aqueous medium like watercolor that dries to a tough, insoluble film. Its colors retain their brilliance and clarity for centuries. Technically, tempera is a paint in which the vehicle is an emulsion, which is a stable mixture of an aqueous liquid with an oil, fat, wax, and resin. However, the most famous tempera's vehicle is egg yolk. So let me share a video how egg yolk works as a vehicle in tempera's painting.
In the High Renaissance, egg tempera was the principal way of making an image. If you were painting on a panel, it's the most archival painting medium. It lasts longer than watercolors, oil paints, anything. All you need is egg yolk, water, and powdered pigment. All paint starts with raw powdered pigment. And a binder basically is a substance with adhesive properties that holds the paint together. And then when it's applied to a surface, the binder then dries and holds the paint on the surface of whatever it is, a panel or canvas or whatever it is that you're painting. The egg white, we don't use an egg yolk tempera. And then what I want to get into my jar is just the egg yolk. Feel like a child here. Paul Cadmus, he said at this point, it's a fairly viscous, it's the pure egg yolk. He said he would mix in enough water so that it had the consistency of half and half. Give it a good shake. Yeah, and that's about right. And that is it. That is the binder for egg tempera. When you mix the egg yolk binder in with the powdered pigment, and mix it up, you've got your egg tempera. So this is the way I do it. I will bring a little bit of the dried pigment, and I just dip my palette knife, get a little bit of egg yolk.
So the egg wheel plays a role like a glue to stick the pigment powder on the artwork surface.
And that's tempera. Easy as that. Egg tempera goes on in thin strokes. It dries very quickly, within seconds. So you cannot mess around and model and blend the egg tempera. All has to be, it's all hatch marks, one on top of the other. If you look carefully at it, you'll see all these strokes, stroke, 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 stroke. Each individual, they're not, if any kind of illusion of soft transitions are because it's very carefully regulated, and by building up these multiple very thin strokes one on top of the other. With egg temperas, you can see this is very flat. It's a very fluid medium. If you tried to add a glob of egg tempera, it would dry and crack off, it would flake off. Everything has to be built in very delicate layers, and that's what gives George Tooker's paintings that's almost opalescent, satiny quality. Because when you're looking at the surface of a tempera painting, and he's doing it very much in the classic Quattrocento style that he was talking about, you're kind of staring through several layers until you're kind of staring into the paint surface, and to a certain extent, the white of the board underneath maybe 12 layers of paint is reflecting out through it. So it has this almost gauzy-like opalescence, which I think adds a certain almost surreal quality to whatever it is that you're painting, which appeals to me.
All right. So, oops, that was tempera painting. So, as you said, tempera dries quickly, and so the colors cannot be blended easily once they are set down. So, the artists have to finish their painting quickly. Traditionally, tempera was sewed on a wood panel support prepared with a ground of gesso, a mixture of white pigment, and glue that sealed the wood and could be sanded and rubbed to a smooth ivory-like finish. Now, let's move on to the third painting technique, oil painting. Oil paints consists of pigment compounded with oil. Historically, the most commonly used oils have been linseed oil, poppy seed oil, and walnut oil. And today, commercial manufacturers of artists' colors often grind the darker pigment with linseed oil and the light pigments such as white and yellow with poppy seed oil or sunflower oil, which do not yellow over time as linseed oil tends to do. What all these oils have in common is that they will dry at room temperature, leaving the pigment particles suspended in a transparent film. This is Joyce Vermeer's oil painting, Girl with a Pearl Earring in 1665. And Joyce Vermeer was a Dutch Baroque period painter who specialized in domestic interiors since a middle-class life. During his lifetime, he was a moderately successful provincial genre painter. So this is made by the traditional oil painting style. So I'm gonna share a video how to make the traditional oil paint with the powder and with the mixture of the powder and the oil.
Is made from a simple combination of two ingredients. The first is the binder. the material that glues the colored particles to the canvas or panel. In oil paint, the binder is a drying oil, a fluid that absorbs oxygen from the air and becomes a solid film over time. The most common drying oil was flax oil, usually called linseed oil. It was pressed from the seeds collected from the flax plant, like those shown here. The same plant was used as the source for the fibers used to make linen canvases. Here's a sample of linseed oil. The other ingredient is the pigment. This is an insoluble powder which provides the color to the paint. Pigments were derived from a number of sources. Historically, a large percentage of pigments were made by grinding natural earths containing iron oxides. Here we see a lump of red earth and red earth pigment made from a similar sample.
All right, so you don't need to watch all of them. So that's the way how to make the traditional oil paint. And now, oh, forgot to say something here. So, so the traditional oil paints are made like this by mixing pigment and the oil together with the heavy and even bottom tool, like the cone she's holding now. So many masters of painting in art history love to use oil for their painting as a binder or vehicle because it dries slow, so artists can easily revise their painting and available blend colors on the work surface. So let's compare oil with tempera in terms of vehicle. So oil painting and tempera painting looks almost the same, and they use the same color pigment powder. And they can also paint on wood, canvas, or diverse surfaces. However, oil is much cheaper than egg yolk of tempera's vehicle, and oil is easy to get compared to the other vehicle. Also, oil paint dries slowly, so easy to blend on the work surfaces. So that's why many painters prefer to use oil vehicle for their painting. Now let's move on to the last painting medium, acrylic. Uh, so the you know, enormous developments in chemistry during the early 20th century had an impact on artists' studio, and by 1930s, chemists had learned to make a strong, weatherproof industrial paints using a vehicle of synthetic plastic resins. These new synthetic artist colors are broadly known as acrylics. The vehicle consists of acrylic resin polymerized through emulsion in water. So as acrylic paint dries, the resin particles coalesce to form a tough, flexible, and waterproof film. And acrylic can mimic the effects of the oil paint and the watercolor by concentration of water. So let's look at this painting as an example. So many contemporary artists use acrylic because it doesn't need a special vehicle or binder to use. It can make oil paint and watercolor effect by water's concentration. So when you use a small amount of water, you can make oil paint effect. And when you add enough water in the acrylic paint, then you can use it like a watercolor paint. So like this painting, the artist shows the oil painting effect on the emphasis part and the watercolor effect on the subordination part by using acrylic paints, the water concentration. So let me share a video to show how to control the water with the acrylic paint.
In this clip, I'm going to show you watercolor and oil effects in acrylic paint. You will need a canvas, You will need acrylic paint. You will need paintbrushes. You'll need a cup of water. We're going to start off with the oil effects. You're going to want to have your paint nice and thick. Acrylic paint has the properties to go on very, very thick. And you see, if you just keep it thick, you can work it as if it's oils. The difference is it dries really quickly. So if you want your oily effect, you're still going to have to work very, very quickly because it doesn't have the open time that oils have. So you see, you can create all different effects, and you just want to keep your paint nice and thick. For a watercolor effect, you're going to want to take your brush and really mix it in so that you get a nice translucent effect. And you see, you're just going to add water and get that watery effect. So you're going to thin it down to really, really translucent.
See, like this, with the acrylic paint, you can create the oil effect, oil paint effect, and the watercolor effect. So that's all for today. Here is today's topic. It's pretty much simple. Is drawing, painting a learned skill or a natural talent? So please respond to the question with your opinion. That's all.